Welcome, everyone. In today's explainer, we're diving into something that literally happens right in our own backyards. Yet it's this incredibly complex, hidden, chronological hero's journey. We're going to explore the botanical architecture of plant reproduction. Seriously, it's an epic tale of survival, travel, and absolutely brilliant biological engineering. So let's jump right into this. To make sure we're all on the same page, we need to establish our scientific baseline. Today, we're focusing entirely on angiosperms. Simply put, these are plants that utilize the flower as their specialized reproductive structure to produce male and female gametes, seeds, and eventually fruit. Think about it for a second. Plants are stuck in the ground. They can't just walk around to find a mate. So the flower is basically their ultimate biological solution to that problem. It's a highly specialized structure designed from the ground up for the production and transfer of life. To make sense of all this, we've broken the journey down into 4 chronological stages. First, the anatomy of a flower. Second, the pollination journey. Third, we'll go inside double fertilization. And finally, we'll look at the shift from flower to fruit. Okay, let's kick things off with section 1, anatomy of a flower, setting the stage. Before we can really appreciate the epic action of plant reproduction, we absolutely have to map out the playing field. A typical flower actually contains both male and female reproductive organs right next to each other. We have the male reproductive organ, which is called the stamen. And sitting right alongside it is the female reproductive organ, known as the pistil, or sometimes called the carpel. Let's just ground ourselves in these 2 high-level systems before we zoom in on the microcomponents of each one. All right, let's get a little closer. On the male side, the stamen features the anther. These are basically little sacs where the pollen, the male gametes or sperm cells develop. And holding that anther up is the filament, which is just a slender stalk. Now, looking over at the female side, the pistil has a few more moving parts. At the very top is the stigma, and it is specifically designed to be sticky so it can catch passing pollen. Right below that is the style, which is a tube connecting down to the ovary. This swollen base contains 1 or more ovules, and that's exactly where the female gametes, the egg cells, are safely housed, just waiting for fertilization. But these reproductive organs don't do all this work alone. They're surrounded by some pretty vital supporting characters. The non-reproductive parts include the petals, which, as we all know, are usually brightly colored. Their job is absolutely crucial. They act like giant biological billboards to attract pollinators. And underneath those petals, we have the sepals. These are those little green, leaf-like structures whose main job is to guard and protect the delicate flower bud before it even opens up. Moving right along to section 2, the pollination journey, the travel. This right here marks the start of the pollen grain's turbulent quest. So what is pollination? Well, it's the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of a flower. I know it sounds pretty simple, but this physical movement is the absolutely crucial first step of the entire journey. Without this transfer from the male's sacs to that sticky female surface, the whole process just comes to a complete halt. Now, what's really fascinating is how this transfer actually happens. It breaks down into 2 main methods. Self-pollination is when pollen transfers to the stigma of the very same flower, or maybe another flower on that exact same plant. But cross-pollination, that's where things get a bit more adventurous. This is the transfer from one plant to a completely different plant of the same species. Doing this massively increases genetic diversity, which is a huge survival advantage. And to pull off cross-pollination, immobile plants basically outsource the job. They recruit outside help using pollinators like bees, butterflies, birds, and even bats. Or they just rely on the environment, like wind and water, to do all the heavy lifting. Which brings us to section 3, inside double fertilization, the climax. When a compatible pollen grain finally lands on that stigma, the microscopic magic kicks into high gear across 4 unique sequential steps. Step 1, pollen tube growth. The pollen grain actually germinates right there on the stigma and grows a long tube straight down through the style into the ovary, entering the ovule through a tiny opening called a micropyle. Step 2, travel of sperm cells. 2 male gametes, sperm cells, travel down this newly formed tube. Step 3 is the first fusion, which is also known as Xenogamy, and step 4 is the second fusion, this time with the polar nuclei. Let's unpack the crucial outcome of step 3. During that first fusion, or Xenogamy, one of those 2 sperm cells fuses with the egg cell inside the ovule. This fusion forms a diploid zygote. Basically, that means it now has a full, complete set of genetics. This is incredibly important because this zygote is the origin point that will eventually develop into the actual plant embryo. That single diploid zygote literally holds the blueprint for the future plant's root, its stem, and its leaves. But hold on, remember there were 2 sperm cells that traveled down that tube? Here is where we see the unique second mission of the sperm. During the second fusion, that second sperm cell completely bypasses the egg and instead fuses with 2 polar nuclei located right in the center of the ovule. This forms a triploid cell, so we're combining 3 sets of genetics here. Why does it do this? Well, because this cell develops into the endosperm. The endosperm is a specialized, nutrient-rich tissue whose entire purpose is to nourish that growing embryo we just talked about. Basically, the embryo gets the life, but the endosperm provides the packed lunch to make sure it actually survives. And finally, we arrive at section 4, from flower to fruit, the resolution. This is honestly my favorite part. A real aha moment where we bring this complex biological process full circle and connect it directly to our everyday lives. After successful double fertilization, the parts of the flower transform dramatically. Remember the ovule we discussed? That becomes the seed, protecting and housing the embryo plant. The zygote becomes the embryo itself, ready to become future roots, stems, and leaves. Now, get this. The ovary, that swollen base of the pistil, swells up even further to become the fruit. The fruit's main job is to protect those seeds and aid in their dispersal by wind, water, or animals. And the ovary wall becomes the pericarp, which is what we know as the skin and flesh of the fruit we eat. Every single time you bite into a piece of fruit, you are quite literally eating a mature plant ovary. Crazy, right? So what happens to the rest of the flower? Because the post-fertilization structures, the seeds and the fruit, have completely taken over the critical job of protection and dispersal now, the original architecture just isn't needed anymore. Eventually, those brightly colored petals, the pollen-producing stamens, and the style all just wither away and fall right off the plant. Their part in this epic hero's journey is officially complete. To wrap this up, our source material has a great quote that beautifully summarizes the culmination of this whole journey. The mature fruit protects the seeds until conditions are right for germination, allowing the cycle of life to begin anew. It really is a deeply satisfying resolution to an absolutely incredible reproductive cycle. And that wraps up today's structural breakdown. But, the biological rabbit hole goes way, way deeper. I want to leave you with a final thought directly from our source material. Would you like to explore the intricate cellular mechanics of double fertilization next? Or would you rather dive into the wild and wonderful different mechanisms of seed dispersal? Think about it and let that spark your curiosity. Until next time, keep learning and keep exploring.